I'm John Hancock of the West Plains Water Coalition. This is Water Watch. Dr. Chad Pritchard teaches geology at Eastern Washington University. He has been investigating West Plains water, including PFAS, for the last 12 years. Dr. Pritchard's willingness to attend public meetings to inform and explain is greatly appreciated. He works not just in the lab, but also in the neighborhood. His study results are made available for actionable information that supports cleanup planning.
I'm always impressed by what the West Plains has done, and exactly what's been said here is the more you speak out, the more people will help you. PFAS in the West Plains, 2017 was the big number, where we were able to do a public records request, and there's a graph on the left there that shows extremely high levels over in the Fairchild Air Force Base. Also some pretty high levels that we'll find associated with the fire district locations. And I've been talking a lot with Nick Henry about sampling more of the fire districts as well. But we do have contamination, of course, over into the Palisades, and that's kind of where I jumped in, and that was when there was talk about there being contamination at the Spokane International Airport. It's spread out across the entire West Plains. Not everywhere, of course. I mean, there are places where it's not detected. So we know there's also fixes, right? We were talking about how there's new things that are popping out, different ways to break apart the carbon and the fluorine and clean up. But we have to know where it is, and it's better probably to try to pump it and treat it, or treat it in somewhere in the ground and try and get it out of the system. We just have to know where it is, and we're just starting to really process that in the West Plains. This is the original measles map, or the red spot map right here. This is something that we came up with the Spokane County Water Resources. It's really complicated area, even though we know there's just two basalts and then there's sand and gravel on top of it, but it's extremely complicated. On the southern boundary there, there's the Needham Hill and these Olson Hills, the other Riddle Hills. Before I knew we were getting this grant, we got another grant to pay for the uranium lead age dating of all that, and so we just got those results back, and we have a bunch of, like, Needham Hill is a 60 million year old granite. Riddle Hill is a 1.5 billion year old calc silicate, or like a sandstone, essentially. And that's really important for us because it's cool. You guys all like rock? Yeah. But also because these older basement rocks, especially granite, are grown in together, and so they have a really low hydraulic conductivity. The water will not go through them. So that's like the bathtub base. And so all the water should be in the West Plains going to this northeast direction, which is a lot different than the whole Columbia Basin. The whole Columbia Basin should kind of go towards the center of the basin. So we're in a very unique location, and the prettiest place in the world, I think. And then our boundary goes across Marshall Creek. Not to be a spoiler alert, but we did find no non-detect in Marshall Creek this spring. And then we go up to Latah Creek in the upper northeast corner there, and it goes out to the Spokane River. Our northwestern boundary is Deep Creek, and then that wraps back around into our a little paleo channel, and then the hills right there. The model itself that we're doing is going to have the sand and gravel deposits from soil surveys and from well logs and things that you've seen before that on the top. And then we have the Wanapum, or this upper basalt. And then there's usually this really undulatory old lake deposit where you can find like leaves and little pine needles and sometimes a fish if you're like really lucky. We're going to use that money to make a big groundwater model. I talked about this a little bit. Groundwater modeling systems. We just use boreholes and cool GIS layers to figure out where that water is going to go down a paleo channel into the lower aquifer and that kind of geologic factor. We're doing about 40 locations across the West Plains where we're monitoring over a year. And we can say, yeah, I didn't, like right now I've got non-detect here, but in the springtime there's more water. And so the values will be lower, dilution, dissolution to pollution, unfortunately. And so we're going to do that for a year and see what happens as the water levels go up and down. And then also if there's migration to some extent. But water moves really slowly underground, extremely slowly. They're going to try to figure out some of the fingerprinting sources as to where these different groups are all interrelated statistically for the different types of PFAS and the different concentrations. That's what we're going to do. So far, we've got our QAP together, Quality Assurance Project Plan. Sorry, he'd already made the joke. Yeah. My son always gave me a hard time about working on my QAP so much. And we've started groundwater modeling. We've worked with a whole bunch of different people. We finally got Stacy Warrens, our GIS professor at Eastern Washington University, and she's got some really nice ways to play with different elevation data. And so now we're going to take that route. So we can go, the existing models are either too coarse, or the one that I tried to make was way too detailed and too convoluted because there's just so much data in it. So this new raster data should be a really good way to actually start that groundwater model. And then we're sampling a whole bunch. We've got Jerusha's right there. There's a picture of Jerusha and Aaron. We went out and sampled all of the surface water around the boundaries because that's pretty important for our model too, is the source and sinks. But there they are at 9 Mile Falls. We did find out that Latah Creek, at least in the springtime, and all of our stops from Latah Creek all the way to 9 Mile were non-detect for PFAS. We found quite a few wells in the West Plains too that are also non-detect right now. Some of those are north of that area. On the left are some of the lakes that we have in our area. A lot of our lakes do have PFAS in them because there's not water coming in and out. It's stagnant, and PFAS doesn't want to break down, right? This is they're built to last forever. Not ever, but for a really long time. And so they're going to accumulate in lakes. And so West Medical Lake had Eastern State Hospital's wastewater treatment facility, and then also Medical Lake's wastewater treatment facility discharge into West Medical Lake, and so that's probably one of the highest levels that we'll find in surface water is West Medical Lake. Medical Lake has a little bit. Willow Lake has a little bit. Silver Lake. We've sampled any lake that might be feeding into the West Plains, and they all have had a little bit in there. Rivers, again, all these lower values on right here. Are non-detect, so you won't see them on there. So like Marshall Creek, Latah, and Spokane River. We did sample Mystic Falls and then at Finch Arboretum, just at the north part of that for Garden Springs, and found levels that were a little bit higher. And then also Deep Creek, we did find some, and then also some springs in the area have that coming out. And that works for us. Springs are great for us to sample too. So if you have a nice spring, yeah, great. On your property, a lot of people don't drink from a very, very shallow well, which I think is a good idea, not to drink from a shallow well. We are going to finish up our model big time this year. That's my big push in the fall especially. And then we're going to have a report by June of 2025 with maps, a whole lot of maps and groundwater models. The last time I came and talked, I mentioned that there's studies that rain has PFAS in it, and rain does. A lot of places have PFAS. In Spokane County, we've been working with NOAA. We actually just cleaned up our rain gauges yesterday for today's big rain that we had and last night. But we are only finding PFBA, which is a very short chain, and that's known to go through people's bodies very quickly. So we don't have PFAS coming out of the rain, which is great for our model. Whew. I was a little scared when I said that up here, and then I was like, oh man, I hope that doesn't happen. And it didn't, so we don't have the PFBA. And I also accidentally tested filtered water from Fairchild Air Force Base, and those wells, the filters do a really good job. There is a little bit of PFBA that comes out of those, but again, that's something that's very short. It's only like 3 carbon chains, and it goes through the bodies really quickly. So it's a good thing. Foam is, AFFF is a firefighting foam, and so say Medical Lake's got 10 parts per trillion PFAS in it. The foam is going to have a lot more than that. It's like we actually looked at Jerusha had to point out to me that the results from that method were in parts per billion, so they're 1,000 times higher than the parts per trillion. They were about the same. It's a method that people are starting to agitate water and build the foam, and then they can scrape it off and then throw that or incinerate that as a way to get PFAS out.
Can you help us understand how we can make decisions regarding this scheme to pipe water in versus getting good information whether we have filters on our wells or under the sink filters? Because I'm concerned that this piping water in scheme is really a utility in the future, and it's going to change the character of the West Plains and bring a lot more growth. And just in a nutshell, can we really be putting faith, should we be investigating our own filters rather than getting behind this scheme to be piping water up here?
I think Commissioner French did a great job of talking about that. Bringing clean water in is a great step, I think. I also do think that filtering is a great thing because that's going to help clean up the groundwater.
I've got this map, and it shows Airport Paleo Channel. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah.
What is that?
So the paleo channels, yeah, and I didn't really talk as much about the geology. I probably should have. These step toes, the hills, the isolated hills we have below in the southern part there, were much larger before the Ice Age floods came through and scoured all the soil off, and they've had drainage systems coming off of them. And those drainage systems go back at least 16 million years old, as long as the basalt has. And so they've been sized into the basalt, these drainages. So like there's the big one from yeah. There's Willow Lake is right here. And there was a whole drainage system that went north there. I mean, it's kind of crazy to think we are probably part of the Rocky Mountains here. But then the 16 million years ago, like we have 1,000 feet of basalt came in different times. And then we have, in some places, like 100 feet of gravel on top of that. So all our valleys are just beep, flat. And the bunny rabbits, yeah, they can't jump around as much on the hills.
PFAS coming from the airport into that channel?
PFAS coming from the airport, and so the airport paleo channel is probably a preferential pathway. So these paleo channels were filled by the Missoula floods. Missoula floods, it was like 400 feet of water going 60 miles an hour, scoured out the existing channels and scoured them deep. And there's a couple of places where there's dry waterfalls. So like Dry Falls itself, where the water just kept on pounding in one place and carved out these isolated depressions. And those are places where water can stay and probably interact a little bit between the different aquifers. The paleo channels are all sand and gravel. So the hydraulic conductivity is so much faster. It's like 500 times faster that groundwater can flow through those. This is one way that groundwater is being transmitted really quickly. And then we're more normally drinking from the basalt themselves, the aquifers. A big thanks to everybody that's helping with this project.
For the West Plains Water Coalition, I'm John Hancock.